Just a word of caution, this podcast does contain material related to sexual assault, which could be upsetting to some listeners. Please make sure you're emotionally resourced and seek help from a trauma specialist or medical professional if you need it.
It's almost not anymore about whether people believe her. It's about whether they care. That's the extra dangerous and sobering part of this to me, is ultimately nobody cares.
Hi, and welcome to Slut or Not, the podcast.
Tell it to me straight. Don't leave out a word. Don't leave out anything you think I should have.
I'm Kelly Shoker, and I'm the director of Slut or Not, the Diary of a Rape Trial, which is a feature-length documentary film exploring what it is like to report rape and following activist Mandi as she fights to change how victims of sexual assault are treated by the criminal justice system. You can also find the show notes related to this episode on our site and more episodes of Slut or Not, the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and on our website at www.slutornut.ca. And if you'd like to share your own story of sexual assault, gender-based violence, or your expertise on the legal system or trauma related to sexual assault, and you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, please email us at slutornutthemovie@gmail.com. We had an entirely different episode planned for this week, but given the news and the Senate hearing, we decided to shift the focus of this week's episode to current events. I wanted to talk to individual women about their reaction to the sexual assault allegations made against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. One of the women I spoke to is named Sophie. She's 24 years old, works at a casting agency, and also does freelance journalism. She grew up in Bethesda, Maryland, the same city where Brett Kavanaugh himself was born and raised. I asked Sophie why she was interested in following the Kavanaugh hearing and what it meant to her personally.
I think this Kavanaugh thing has been fascinating to me because it's a lot of people talking about how kind of all of this happening in the news is unearthing some really old, really traumatic stuff in them. And that's crazy hard that everyone's having to relive things. Everyone's really imbuing a lot of their own sort of personal history into this. And I can't imagine that kind of pressure feels great for Dr. Ford. It's like, it feels like we're on the edge of something right now. I can't remember a time in my life that something has felt so cataclysmic. I think in either way it goes, just like something is about to explode or shatter or manifest. If he is nominated, it's going to be demoralizing for most, if not all, women that have experienced anything even slightly similar to what happened to Dr. Ford. If it goes the other way, I see it being a positive step. And there's talk of revolutions and sort of women rising back up. This discourse of empowerment that we've been kind of circulating right now, I think everyone's sort of waiting to see how this pans out. That's why it's kind of as intense and ferocious as it is. Speaking of which, it's an especially hard time for me because I'm just coming up on the 2-year anniversary of my assault, which happened in Toronto, but was a friend of mine, a former friend of mine from my university. We had kind of been back in contact a little bit. Sort of the month before, I'd been going through a breakup and was super lonely. And he came to visit his buddy in Toronto. And earlier in the weekend, we kind of had a flirtation going on, whatever. And then he kind of pressured me into asking him back to my place. And I felt a little weird about it, just mostly even because I don't like sleeping next to people that I don't know very well. I find it a very intimate thing. But he was like, oh, I live in Montreal, we're not going to get a chance. And I sort of felt like I had to, he kept kind of pushing. I gave him some sort of non-committal no's, but so I eventually agreed. And the guy whose house he'd been staying at, another friend of mine, was like, hey, just so you know, if you guys leave, he can't come back here later. I've got a test in the morning. And I remember thinking about that later on and being like, I wish I could kick him out because I don't want him here, but I can't impose on that friend as a test tomorrow, which in retrospect is stupid. But we ended up back at my house and I could feel the energy was off right away. And he kind of started throwing me around in, I guess, a way that he thought was aggressive sexy, but was really just aggressive, kind of like hitting me and choking me and like, oh, you don't like that? Like sort of a game. And I was like, okay, this isn't, I actually am not in, like, you need to stop. But it was sort of like oh, you want me to stop? Like this kind of teasy, like whatever. And at one point he just kind of like started trying to have sex with me. And I was like, hey, do you have a condom? And I don't know why I said that, because I didn't want it anyway, but I think I was trying to stop, or like, what, I don't know what the deal was. But I remember this whole time feeling like I was kind of in a dream. And I know that I was resisting and loud. And I remember wondering if my roommates could hear anything, and if they would recognize that something was going on. To this day, I don't really know. We weren't close, but it was sort of like, he was like, well, I don't have an STD, do you? And I was like, well, no, but I'm not like trying to get pregnant or anything. And he was like, well, it's fine. And I was like, it's not. And he was like, okay, fine, whatever. And like pushed my head back down to like suck his dick. And I was like, okay, like I'm choking and I'm like I don't, like I'm crying. Like I don't want this to be happening right now. But his hands were like on the back of my head and like I couldn't move. And then he like pushed me back down onto the bed, and I was like taking a breath when I felt him like trying to have sex with me again. And he did, like up to a certain point, like he probably like thrusted like 4 or 5 times. And then he was like, I think we need some lube. And I was like, is this,
oh my
like,
God.
in retrospect, I was like, that was it. Like, that was when the last of my innocence, like, was gone. Like, I didn't feel it. I felt a loss at that moment, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I was crying, and I was saying, stop. And he kind of, like, then, like, did stop eventually, and, like, leaned over me and was, like, very, like, caring and, like, oh, it's okay. As though I was, like, feeling bad that, like, I didn't have lube, or that, like, I didn't, you know, like, it was this weird kind of, like, condescension of, like, oh, it's okay. You're okay. And I was like, what? Like, I'm clearly not. And I like got up, and he was kind of like lying face down on my bed and like wouldn't move. And I was like, get up. Like, don't stay here. And he like literally was just kind of like looking up at me with like a shit-eating grin that I think he thought that was cute. And I like went to the washroom and like stared at my face for like 4 minutes. And I was like, do I look different? Like, what's happening? How do I get him out of here? If that friend told me that he couldn't go back there, like, I don't want him on the street, but like, what am I supposed to, I was like trying to figure this out. And I went back to my room, and he was like asleep in my bed. And I was like, okay, so like, now what? Like, and at the time I was just like, I'm exhausted. I don't know what to do. So like, I fell back into my bed, and I was like really awake the entire night. He was like next to me. He got up in the morning and kind of like climbed on top of me again and like forced my eyes open and was like, good morning, like, look at me. And then was like, why won't you look at me? And I was like, stop trying to control my body. Like, this is not okay. What just happened was not okay. Eventually he like was like, oh, I need to leave. I have a bus to catch. And like literally like pulled me / pushed me to the door so he could like still say goodbye on his own terms, and then left. And I think it took me like, I had like 3 or 4 showers right off. I washed my clothes like 3 times. I went to the pharmacy to get Plan B just in case. It was only later that I knew that what had happened had qualified as rape. Like, I was like, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know what it was really. I just felt like a zombie kind of. And then at that point, kind of the idea of reporting just exhausted me, and I'd already showered, and like, I knew there was no one that was going to corroborate anything. Like, it was me versus him. And then I like called my best friend. She lived in Boston. We cried. And so it was Halloween weekend. And as we're getting closer to that now, I'm like feeling it more, like this heaviness more and more. And it's like my assault was recently enough that it on its own affects me every day. And I still think about it every day. So it's not that this has unearthed anything for me. It's just highlighted it in a more public sphere. So the weirdest part for me is seeing the news and the internet talking about it now. Like, it's not just all happening in my head. It's like also outside of me. And in a way, maybe that not a good way, but in a way it's encouraging to me. Like, it's uniting a lot of people that are all in the same boat, and it's a terrible boat to be in, but it's sort of like, look how many of us are all here and struggling, but also like really wanting the system to change. Also, like, I hope people are learning. Like, I hope people that didn't know much about the realities of sexual assault are gaining something from the intensely public nature of this. And I'm totally ranting at this point.
No,
But,
oh my gosh, I'm just like, I'm just so sorry that that happened. And I also wish I could find that guy and just punch him in the face.
yeah,
It's just
yeah.
terrible. And somebody asked me, are you going to do this podcast episode just assuming he's guilty of doing it? And I was like, at this point, it doesn't even really matter. It's just that, we have to see somebody taking this woman's complaint seriously and doing something about it, whether that be putting it on hold or investigating it or not nominating him. Something has to be taken seriously. But for me, I was like, yeah, I am going to do it as if he's guilty, because I just took one look at his face during that hearing and I just saw all over his face what I've seen all over the face of people that I know as abusers who then deny it.
Yeah.
So I was like, I can't look at his face.
This guy, my attacker, I remember I sent him a text like a few days later and was like, I'm not okay with what happened, because what happened was literally assault and all this stuff. And he took ages to respond. And for that reason, I thought I'm still pretty convinced that he like consulted the internet or like a lawyer or something with like what to respond, because it was very sort of like apologetic and sort of like, I had no idea, like if I had any idea the kind of harm I was causing, I would have stopped. And I was like, what? Like I said, I told you to stop. Like I was crying. Like, what did you think was happening? I'm confused. But sort of like, it was very like, I had no idea that like you considered it, you interpreted it that way. And it's like, really? Like how, I don't, like, are guys that kind of like one-minded? It's this anger thing too. Like I had people later be like, you know what, I'm actually not surprised, because like he's had anger management problems. And I was like, well, that's nice. Why didn't anyone get him to like deal with those before he attacked me? Like that would be great. Over the next few months, I lost literally all of my friends that lived in Toronto because they kind of like took his side. That sucked. Like you can't still try to stay friends with me and also be validating him, because you don't want your life to change, because you don't want to have to critically analyze the people in your life, and you don't want to have to admit that maybe you made the wrong choice when you chose friends. Like staying neutral is not a valid thing. That's just copping out. Honestly, like you can come up with an argument always to like not, hold somebody responsible for something. Like I saw a tweet that was like, oh, but he's so young, there's no need to ruin his whole life. And then the next quotation was, he's so old, there's no need to ruin the rest of his life. And then underneath was like, can someone please refer me to the 27-hour period in which it's acceptable to hold men accountable for their actions? And I was like, that's fully like my friends who were like, well, you know what? Like he just made a mistake, or, well, he apologized, so like you should feel better about it. Or like, well, I don't want to make a character judgment based on like that one thing that you said he did. Like he probably has learned from it, and it's not going to help anyone to kind of punish him for it for the rest of his life. And I'm like, well, I'm being punished for it. Like I can feel this sort of like, I'm not the same person that I was. Like I lost a massive part of myself. I've had a lot of lifestyle changes because I'm extra cautious now, and I'm extra careful about when I go out, and if I see someone kind of like following me on the street. And like I don't really go to parties anymore because there's like weird blurred lines at parties. I'll shut myself off from opportunities, and I won't like use the dating apps because I'm too terrified of random strangers. Like I can't. But I'm like, also the other side of me is like, man, I'm lonely, I'm like ready to date again. And then the other side's like, well, you never know who these people could be. And it's just like frustrating, but that's an everyday thing. And it's hard to hear people kind of talking outright about assault without being able to share how personal it is to me and how debilitating my experience and my healing has been. And it's also hard because like you can't really talk about this at work. Like, yes, everyone's talking about it, but they're not like talking about it. And it's like the most you can sort of say is like, well, yeah, I'm feeling weird today because of all the Kavanaugh stuff. And people are like, all right, well, whatever, back to work. And it's like, how do you say like, I feel like my reality is hinging on what happens in the States, and I feel like disheartened and upset and exhausted and so angry all the time because I feel this so personally.
It's true. It's these water cooler conversations, and we kind of, you see other women and you're like, oh, Kavanaugh, and you give each other this knowing look, or it comes up in conversation with men in your life, and they're like, get huffy about it, and like, he needs a trial, and da da da. And it's kind of just constant, it's more disassociation. It's just constant, you're disassociating from what's happened to you, and all that disassociating that survivors are doing during this time period, because every time someone talks about it, you kind of have to like push whatever thoughts come up about your own situation aside and kind of maintain your composure and not get angry, not get upset, not show too many emotions. And that constant disassociating is exhausting, and it's also not really helpful to try and integrate that experience and process that experience and move on from the experience, especially for women that haven't told anyone. Because I do think a lot of women have not told anybody about assaults that have happened to them. So I just feel for everybody that's doing this, disassociating.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is a one-sided thing, most of the time this is men assaulting women. So it's bringing up feelings of women that have been assaulted. And then I'm sure in men, it's bringing up all these fears of like, oh, did I assault someone, or I did assault someone? I wonder if they'll ever come forward, or, will they ever find out what I did? Because obviously there are people that do this and have no repercussions.
For sure. A lot of guys out there have assaulted women and not known that that's what they were doing. Like, I think this is causing a massive rift in society right now, not even just split into factions as far as one side is, do we believe her? The other side is, do we give him the benefit of the doubt? And then beyond that, it's, do we believe that what he did was sexual assault, or don't we? And then beyond that, it's, do we believe sexual assault is a big deal, or don't we? And each side has so much righteousness and conviction that their side is the right side that it's scary. It's almost not anymore about whether people believe her. It's like, it's about whether they care.
Yeah.
If they do believe her. It's like, that's the extra dangerous and sobering part of this to me, is like, to nominate him would be proving that like ultimately nobody cares what happened to you. Like, I think there's a lot of kind of like backpackers on this thing, and it's like, this isn't some like cool trend to be a part of. Like, this is a very serious thing. My heart is aching for the amount of people right now that like I can feel this like twinge of hope, but then like a lot of despair and like a lot of anxiety. Like, you can walk down the street and you can like feel it in the air. And I'm like, I see you, like you are seen, but I don't know how to help you. Like, my biggest form of healing has been writing. And so I've got these pieces online under the name Sophie Rose about sort of the actual experience, and then how trauma persists, and then like what it's like to date after this. And I guess the common thread, and I always try to be optimistic, but it's always like, I'm having to get to know a new version of myself that I like don't necessarily like very much. And I didn't get to choose to make myself that way. I don't like that we're all, or specifically me, are equating what's happening in the news right now to our own kind of validation and our own experiences. But I don't know that there's another way to do it. Like, I think that we, as people, we want to relate to things. And I think that's why this is terrifying for so many people, is that it doesn't look like it's going the way that survivors would like for it to go, or that it will. And that's sort of just a really like, what is going to happen to the women of America, to this morale, to like anything, if this goes the wrong way. And I think that we're all kind of just like waiting on that right now with bated breath.
Yeah, I think you put that really, really well. I hope that by having these conversations, people can feel more comfortable sharing and processing and having real discussions about things. And I'm really glad that you were able to come on today and talk about this.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know what to say
now.
now.
I love talking. No, I love talking about, because like I don't really get a platform to like talk. Actually, like I write, but I don't usually get to talk. So like, and I'm a talker, so this is great.
Tell me again what the URL is for the magazine that you're talking about, or the online magazine, because it sounds amazing. How do people read those articles?
Yes. So they do once a year. There's a print version of kind of their like the best of the year that they sell and ship out from Australia. But online they post all the time. It's Ramona Mag. So that's RamonaMag.com. And they're, self-care, body positivity, love and sex. Like there's culture, like film reviews and all that kind of stuff too. But it's been super helpful for me, and I know that my writing has helped a lot of people, and in that way, like it's felt almost like gratifying that something good has come from this thing that happened to me, and that if my writing helps people feel less alone, then that's great.
Well, thank you so much, and have a great night, and big hugs.
Yeah, you too. Back at you. Yeah. Enjoy the warmer weather.
You can find the links to the specific articles written by Sophie Rose in the show notes to this episode on our website, www.slutternut.ca/podcast. One thing the Kavanaugh hearing made crystal clear to me is that we need to stop blaming women for being sexually assaulted. We need to stop accusing women coming forward of having political ends to reporting their sexual assault. This isn't a political strategy. Sexual assault is a problem that affects millions of girls and women all across the world. You don't own anyone to smile, smile, smile. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at SlutterNutTheMovie, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel where these podcasts will also be posted. And again, you can find all the details on streaming Slutternut: The Diary of a Rape Trial, on organizing a screening, or ordering a DVD on our website at www.slutternut.ca. Thank you for listening.